Imagine for a second that you are looking at a map of the world, a big, beautiful wall map. You scan the Western Hemisphere, and you see two massive land masses. They stretch from the frozen Arctic tundra in the north all the way down to the icy sub-Antarctic waters of Tierra del Fuego in the south. These continents dominate the globe, and they are both branded with the name of a single man.
It's a name we say every single day. The United States of America, South America, it's completely omnipresent.
Exactly. And here is the massive, just colossal irony at the heart of this subject. These continents are named after a man who, for centuries, was dragged through the mud by historians. He was called a liar, a thief, a fraud, and my absolute favorite historical insult, a pickle dealer.
It really is one of the strangest twists of fate in the historical record. I mean, you have Christopher Columbus, who gets the holiday, the nursery rhymes, and, all the credit in primary school for the discovery.
Right. He's the main character.
He's the main character. But Amerigo Vespucci, he got the branding rights, he got the name on the birth certificate of the New World.
And that's the mission for this deep dive. We are going to try to disentangle the man from the myth. Because for hundreds of years, there has been this vicious academic brawl. Was Amerigo Vespucci a master navigator who intellectually grasped what Columbus couldn't, that this was a new world?
Or was he just a self-promoting opportunist whose letters were maybe forged by publishers just to sell books?
It's the ultimate question of man versus legend. And we have a stack of sources here to help us figure it out. We've got historical records from Florence and Seville, some very, very controversial letters that may or may not be fake, and the cartographic history of how the name America actually ended up on the map.
It's a real detective story.
It is. So let's unpack this. To understand how a so-called pickle dealer gets two continents named after him, we have to start at the beginning. And surprisingly, the story doesn't start on a ship.
No, it doesn't. And that's really the first misconception we need to clear up right away. When we think of the Age of Discovery, we picture these rugged sea captains like Magellan or da Gama.
Right, men born on the waves, smelling like salt and tar.
Exactly. Men who could navigate by instinct. Vespucci was not that guy. He was what you'd call a late bloomer.
A very late bloomer. He was born in 1454 in Florence, Italy. And looking at his background, he was essentially a suit. He was a corporate guy.
He was a creature of the Renaissance.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, Florence in the mid-15th century wasn't just a city. It was, the intellectual and financial capital of the Western world. It was kind of the Silicon Valley of the 1400s.
And the Vespucci family, where did they fit in?
They were plugged right into the mainframe. They weren't the ultra-rich tycoons, the billionaires, so to speak.
Not the top tier.
No, not the absolute top. Think of them as the high-level functionaries, the operators who made the city run. His grandfather was the chancellor of the Florentine government for 36 years. His father was a notary for the Money Changers Guild. But the real currency in Florence wasn't just money. It was who you knew.
Connections.
Connections. And the Vespuccis were tight with the Medici family.
Yeah, the Medicis, the godfathers of the Renaissance.
Precisely. They were close allies of Lorenzo de' Medici the Magnificent. So Amerigo grows up in this orbit of immense power, art, and money. But the thing that really separates him from someone like Columbus is his education.
I noticed this in the notes, and it's fascinating. His brothers went off to the University of Pisa, which seems like the standard successful kid path. But Amerigo stays home. Was that like a bad sign?
Oh, not at all. Yeah, you could argue he got something even better, a more bespoke education. He is tutored privately by his uncle, Giorgio Antonio Vespucci.
And this uncle wasn't just some random relative teaching him his sums.
No. Giorgio was a major figure, a Dominican friar and a celebrated humanist scholar. He ran a school for the sons of Florentine nobles. So he gave Amerigo this incredible one-on-one education in literature, philosophy, and rhetoric. He was being groomed to think.
And crucially,
his uncle taught him geography and astronomy. He studied the ancient Greek cosmographers like Ptolemy and Strabo.
So while Columbus was out there learning how to tie knots and read the wind on a practical level,
Vespucci was learning the theoretical geometry of the universe.
that is a critical distinction.
It is. He learned the framework of the world long before he ever set foot on a deck. This academic background means that later, when he's at sea, he isn't just looking at the waves, he's analyzing the data against the classical theories he spent his youth studying. He has a mental model to test against reality.
Before we move on, we have to mention the cool factor of his family. I was reading that his cousin, Marco, married a woman named Simonetta Vespucci.
Ah, yes, La Bella Simonetta. the beautiful Simonetta.
There are those who don't know art history. Just explain who she was.
She was considered the most beautiful woman in Florence, an absolute icon. She was the model for Botticelli's The Birth of Venus and several other of his major paintings.
So Amerigo isn't just reading dusty books in a study. He's probably hanging out at family dinners with the literal face of the Renaissance.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? A man deeply embedded in high culture. He's a socialite, an intellectual, a man of the court. But, and here's the twist, despite all these advantages, all this culture and connection, his early career was kind of a flop.
Yeah, he seems to really struggle to find his footing. In 1478, when he's in his mid-20s, he goes on a diplomatic mission to Paris with another uncle, Guido Antonio.
Right. They're trying to get French support for Florence's war with Naples and the Pope. A high-stakes mission, and it was largely a failure. King Louis XI was non-committal, cagey. They came back with basically nothing. But for Amerigo, it was a lesson. It gave him a taste of the wider world of international politics.
So after that, what does he do?
He settles into a role working for a junior branch of the Medici family, the one run by Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici. He's basically a household manager, a business agent.
So he's a mid-level manager, he's pushing papers, he's nearing 40 years old. Frankly, if he had died at age 38, history would have forgotten him completely. He would just be a name on a dusty Florentine genealogy chart.
Precisely. But then comes the pivot, the midlife crisis that changed the world. It's around 1492, the same year Columbus is sailing on his first voyage. The Medici send Amerigo to Seville, Spain.
Why Seville? That seems like a bit of a demotion from the glitz and glamour of Florence.
Well, Seville was the new boomtown. It was the gateway to the Atlantic. All the action was shifting there. But the Medicis had a specific problem. They had a business agent there named Tommaso Capponi, who was acting, let's say, suspiciously.
Cooking the books.
That was the fear. So Amerigo was sent as the auditor, the fixer. He goes down there, looks at the ledgers, realizes Capponi is sketchy, and ends up taking over the job himself.
And this is where the story gets gritty. This isn't art and philosophy anymore, is it?
No.
Okay.
This is the nuts and bolts of commerce. He winds up working with another Florentine merchant in Seville named Ginotto Berardi, and Berardi's business was involved in two main things, the African slave trade and ship chandlery.
Chandlery. That's the fancy word for a ship grocery store, right?
Effectively, yes. A much grittier one.
Yeah.
They supply the expeditions, hardtack biscuits, salted meat, rope, tackle, cannons, wine. Everything you need to keep a crew alive or not for months at sea. And their biggest client.
Let me guess. Christopher Columbus.
Christopher Columbus.
This connection just blows my mind. Vespucci didn't just know of Columbus. He was the guy organizing the biscuits. He was the quartermaster.
He was intimately involved. Berardi had invested heavily in Columbus's second voyage. When Berardi died in 1495, Vespucci was the executor of his will. He was left holding the bag, scrubbing the ledgers for these expeditions that, frankly, weren't paying off.
That's a really important piece of context. We look back now and think Columbus discovered America, he must have been rich immediately. But in the late 1490s, the whole Indies business was struggling, wasn't it?
It was a financial disaster. Columbus had promised mountains of gold, a direct route to the spices of the East, quick profits. Instead, he was sending back some slaves and a little bit of gold dust, but nowhere near enough to cover the massive costs of outfitting these fleets.
So Vespucci is sitting in his office in Seville looking at the red ink.
He's seeing the diminishing returns of the merchant life firsthand. He's almost 50 years old. His business partner is dead. The Medicis are starting to use other agents. He's watching his career hit a dead end.
And he sees these ships leaving the harbor every few months, going off to this mysterious new land.
So he decides to stop funding the ships and start riding on them. He trades the ledger for the astrolabe. He decides to see this new world for himself, maybe to figure out if there's actually a way to make it profitable.
This brings us to the section historians call the Vespucci Question. Because depending on who you asked or which document you read, Vespucci either went on 2 voyages, 3 voyages, or 4 voyages. It's a total mess.
It's the headache that has plagued historians for 500 years. The entire evidence for Vespucci's travels relies almost entirely on a handful of letters, and they don't match up.
So we have 2 main sources, right? The Soderini letter and then the private letters. What's the difference?
Okay, so the letters published during his lifetime, like the one addressed to a Florentine official named Piero Soderini, were the blockbusters. They were sensational, exciting, action-packed, and they claimed 4 voyages.
The ones for public consumption.
Exactly. Then there are the private, more sober letters he wrote to his patrons, the Medici family. These weren't published until centuries later. And most experts today believe the private letters are the real deal, and that the published Soderini letter was likely spiced up or even partially forged by publishers trying to sell books. It was a commercial product.
So let's look at the controversial one first. Voyage number 1, allegedly in 1497.
Right. The Soderini letter claims Vespucci left Spain in May 1497. Now, if this were true, and if he hit the mainland of South America as described, he would have beaten Columbus to the mainland by a full year. Columbus didn't reach the mainland until his third voyage in 1498.
That would be a massive historical upset. The whole Columbus discovered America narrative goes out the window, but you're saying the math doesn't work.
The geography described is completely absurd. The route in that letter has them landing somewhere near Honduras and then sailing northwest for 870 leagues. If you plot that on a map, they would have sailed straight through the mountains of Mexico across the desert and popped out in the Pacific Ocean.
Unless he invented an overland hovercraft, that didn't happen.
Exactly. It's geographically impossible.
Yeah.
Later, the historian Bartolomé de las Casas, who's a huge defender of Columbus, accused Vespucci of inventing this 1497 voyage specifically to steal primacy. This is the source of the reputation of him being a liar and thief.
So let's discard the fake voyage for now. Let's look at what we know he actually did. Voyage number 2, the real deal, in 1499.
This one is well documented. He sails for Spain, but he's not the captain. The expedition was led by a tough, experienced captain named Alonso de Ojeda, who had sailed with Columbus.
And Vespucci's role was?
He was likely aboard as pilot because of his astronomical knowledge, or perhaps as a commercial representative for the Florentine investors who backed the trip. He was there to protect the money.
But on this trip, they make a massive, game-changing discovery. They find the mouth of the Amazon River.
It must have been an absolutely incredible sight. Vespucci describes sailing into a region where this massive volume of fresh water was pouring into the ocean so powerfully that they could drink the seawater 25 miles away from the coast.
That is a crucial data point for a geography nerd like Vespucci.
It is. A small island, even a big island like Cuba, doesn't have a watershed large enough to turn the Atlantic Ocean fresh for 25 miles. You need a massive continent to support a river that big. The penny must have started to drop.
But did he realize it was a new continent then, on that trip?
Not quite yet. On this 1499 voyage, he's still trapped in the Columbus mindset. In his letters, he writes about looking for the Cape of Catagara, which was a landmark in Southeast Asia described by the ancient geographer Ptolemy. He still thinks he's maneuvering around the tail end of Asia to get to India.
So he knows it's big, but he thinks it's big Asia.
Correct. He's trying to make the new data fit the old map. And we shouldn't gloss over the darker aspects of this voyage, because they're really important.
What happened on the way back?
On the way back to Spain, after failing to find the passage to India or any great riches, they stopped in the Bahamas. They raided the islands, captured 232 natives, packed them into the hold of the ships, and took them back to Cadiz to sell as slaves.
It's just a grim reminder that these weren't purely scientific expeditions. They were commercial ventures driven by profit, often in the most brutal ways. Vespucci was a man of his time, and that time was brutal.
So he gets back to Spain in 1500. The profits from the slaves are mediocre. Spain isn't exactly throwing money at him for another trip. So, being the adaptable businessman he is, he switches teams.
He goes to the competition. He goes to Portugal.
He does. King Manuel I of Portugal commissions an expedition to investigate Brazil. Now, you have to remember, the Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral had accidentally bumped into the coast of Brazil the year before, in 1500, while trying to sail around Africa to India.
The famous story of being blown off course.
Right. So, the King of Portugal wants to know what he actually owns. Is this landmass just a big island? Is it a continent? And most importantly, is it on the Portuguese side of the line drawn by the Treaty of Tordesillas?
The treaty that divided the unknown world between Spain and Portugal.
Exactly. So he hires the Italian guy who just got back from that neighborhood. Vespucci joins as a pilot under the command of Gonzalo Coelho. They leave Lisbon in May 1501. And at their first stopover in Cape Verde, something incredible happens. One of those small world moments that changes the course of history.
They run into traffic.
They literally bump into Cabral's fleet coming back from India, the actual India.
Okay, this is a critical juncture. You have Cabral with ships full of pepper, cloves, spices, silks, porcelain, and stories about Calicut and highly civilized Asian cities. And then you have Vespucci heading to this wild, unknown new world.
Think about the data comparison happening on that beach in Cape Verde. Vespucci gets to sit down and interview Cabral's crew. He gets hard, verifiable facts. He knows exactly what the flora, fauna, people, and products of India look like. He has his control group. Now he is going to the test group.
So they sail on to Brazil. They hit the coast in August 1501. And this trip, this was not a pleasure cruise.
No, it was terrifying. They landed on the coast and encountered a hostile band of natives from the Tupinamba tribe. Vespucci describes this horrific scene in one of his letters where a crewman, a young Portuguese man, was lured inland and then ambushed and killed.
And the crew saw this happen.
They watched from the ships as the natives butchered, roasted, and ate the man.
That is the kind of image that sears itself into your brain and becomes a defining story of a place.
It certainly stayed with the European public later on and fueled the cannibal narrative. But despite that horror and the obvious danger, they kept sailing south, mapping the coast. On January 1st, 1502, they found a stunning, enormous bay. They named it after the date, the River of January.
Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro. I wonder how many people sunbathing on Copacabana Beach right now know their city was named by Amerigo Vespucci.
Probably very few.
But they didn't stop at Rio. And this is where Vespucci, the navigator, earns his keep. They went far, far south, into the cold, stormy subantarctic waters, possibly as far as 52 degrees south, which would put them near the Falkland Islands or the coast of Patagonia.
And the weather down there is just atrocious, and the sky changes completely.
That was the scariest part for them. The North Star Polaris dropped below the horizon. For a European sailor, that was their anchor. That was how you had navigated for thousands of years. It was gone. Vespucci's there on the deck, freezing, seasick, struggling with his astrolabe and quadrant, trying to map the southern constellations to find a new way to navigate.
And while he's doing all this, he realizes the coast just keeps going south. It doesn't turn west towards Asia.
It's endless. It's a continuous landmass. And it's nothing like the India described by Cabral. The animals are different. No tigers, no elephants. He sees tapirs and capybaras. The people are different. No silks, no great cities, no kings. The plants are different. The stars are different.
This is the eureka moment.
This is the intellectual leap. Columbus had the courage to cross the ocean, but he died trying to force the square peg of his discovery into the round hole of Asian geography. He was locked into his theory.
He was a victim of confirmation bias.
Completely. Vespucci, with his academic background, looked at all the contradictory data, the sheer length of the coastline, the power of the Amazon, the lack of Asian civilizations, and he did the math. He realized, this isn't Asia, this is an island, this is a fourth part of the world.
And he puts this incredible realization into writing. In 1503, a letter attributed to him, Mundus Novus, New World, is published.
He writes to his old patron, Lorenzo de' Medici, "We may rightly call a new world a continent more densely peopled and abounding in animals than are Europe or Asia or Africa."
Continent. That is the magic word. That is the claim.
It was revolutionary.
Yeah.
He is explicitly telling the entire European establishment that the ancients were wrong. Ptolemy, the god of geography for 1,000 years, didn't know about this. It was a direct challenge to the classical view of the universe.
But let's be honest about why Mundus Novus became a bestseller. It wasn't just the nerdy geography updates, it was the tabloid stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was the 16th century version of a viral blockbuster. It was sex and violence. The letter was filled with these lurid, colorful descriptions of the natives, their lack of clothes, their sexual customs, and of course, the cannibalism. It was shocking. It was titillating. It went viral in a way that dry ship logs never could.
It was, perfect clickbait for the new printing press technology.
It was. 12 editions were printed in the first year alone. It was translated into Italian, French, German, Dutch. Everyone who could read was reading Vespucci. Meanwhile, Columbus is sending back these letters full of complaints about his arthritis and mystical ramblings about finding the Garden of Eden. Vespucci won the narrative war because he told a better, more exciting story.
And that narrative victory leads us directly to the map that changed everything. And this part of the story is just a total comedy of errors. It didn't happen in the royal courts of Spain or Portugal. It happened in a muddy little town in eastern France called Saint-Dié.
Right, you have to picture the scene. It's this small group of humanist scholars, basically a little academic startup. They were led by a man named Walter Ludd and a brilliant young cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller.
And what were they working on?
They were working on a new, updated edition of Ptolemy's geography in 1507. They wanted to create a brand new world map that included all these recent discoveries, the sort of geography 2.0.
But they are working with bad intel, or at least incomplete intel.
They are. They had a French translation of the Soderini letter, remember, the sensational one that claims 4 voyages, and that Vespucci discovered the mainland in 1497. They didn't have Columbus's logs. They didn't have the official Spanish records. So as far as they knew, Vespucci was the primary discoverer of this southern landmass.
So they're designing this huge new map, and they need a name for this new landmass in the south.
And their logic was actually quite poetic, if flawed. They looked at the other known continents, Europa, Asia, Africa. In Latin, these are all grammatically feminine names.
All named for women, mythologically speaking.
Exactly. They reasoned the new continent should follow suit. So they took Amerigo's first name, they Latinized it to Americus, and then they feminized that to America.
The land of Amerigo.
And one of the scholars, a poet named Matthias Ringman, wrote this justification in the book that accompanied the map, the Introduction to Cosmography. He said, I see no reason why anyone could properly disapprove of a name derived from that of Amerigo, the discoverer, a man of sagacious genius.
If only they knew the centuries of academic brawling they were about to unleash.
So in 1507, Waldseemüller prints this massive, beautiful, 12-panel wall map. It's the first time the word America appears, printed right across the continent of South America. And because the map was a masterpiece of cartography, it sold. 1,000 copies were printed. It hung in universities, libraries, and palaces all over Europe. The name literally got put on the wall.
But here's the twist that I absolutely love. Waldseemüller eventually realized he screwed up, didn't he?
He did. It's an incredible historical footnote. Years later, by 1513, he got access to better data. He learned that Columbus had actually been there first in 1498. He clearly felt bad about it. He tried to take it back.
How?
He published a new map where he completely removed the name America and just labeled the land Terra Incognita, unknown land. He also labeled a part of Brazil Land of the Holy Cross, which was the official Portuguese name.
He tried to delete the tweet.
He tried, but you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The 1507 map had already circulated widely. Other map makers had already started copying the name America. It was catchy, it sounded good. And then, in 1538, the nail in the coffin comes from the most famous cartographer of all, Gerardus Mercator. He uses America to label not just the southern continent, but the northern one too.
And just like that, the Western Hemisphere is branded. All because a group of scholars in a small French town read a sensationalized letter and made a wrong but very influential assumption.
It's a powerful lesson in the power of the printing press. Columbus discovered the land, but Vespucci, or rather the publishers using his name, discovered the audience.
So what happened to the real Amerigo Vespucci while his name was becoming immortal without his knowledge? Did he know he was famous?
It's very unlikely he ever knew the extent of it, or that a continent was being named after him. He was back in Spain by 1504, and surprisingly, King Ferdinand of Spain didn't hold the Portuguese voyages against him. In fact, he realized Vespucci's practical value.
He didn't just forgive him, the king gives him a massive promotion.
A huge one. A job created specifically for him. In 1508, Vespucci is appointed piloto mayor, the master navigator of the Casa de Contratación in Seville.
We need to explain what that actually means because it sounds like a ceremonial title, but it absolutely was not.
Not at all. It was one of the most important, technical, and secret jobs in the entire Spanish Empire. The Casa de Contratación was the central clearinghouse for all Spanish exploration and trade. Vespucci was the head of the navigational department.
So what were his duties?
He was responsible for training and certifying all the pilots who sailed to the New World. He established a school for navigation. He had to personally examine them to ensure they knew how to use the quadrant and the astrolabe. No one sailed without his approval.
He was the dean of the School of Exploration, the Top Gun instructor.
Exactly. But most importantly, he was in charge of compiling and updating the Padrón Real,
The mastermind.
the secret map. It was a state secret. Every captain returning from the Indies had to report directly to Vespucci and surrender their logbooks and charts. Vespucci would then synthesize that new data to update the official master map of the empire. A copy of that map was then given to the next captain sailing out.
This really validates him, doesn't it? If he were just a fraud or a pickle dealer, the King of Spain would never have entrusted him with the empire's most sensitive navigational and trade secrets.
Exactly. You don't put a con artist in charge of your nuclear codes. The Spanish crown knew he was a competent, serious, and brilliant navigator and cosmographer. He held that prestigious job until the end. He died in Seville on February 26, 1512. He was 57 years old.
And in his will, he left his navigational tools to his nephew, right?
Yes, Giovanni Vespucci, who in true Vespucci family fashion became a pilot himself and then got fired from the same Spanish organization for spying for the Medicis back in Florence.
Once a Medici man, always a Medici man.
It seems so.
So let's bring this all back to the Vespucci question. His reputation has been on this wild roller coaster ride for 500 years.
It really has. In the early 1500s, thanks to Mundus Novus, he was a hero, the discoverer. Then, starting with Las Casas in the mid-1500s, the backlash hit hard. He was branded a thief who stole Columbus's glory. And that hatred lasted for centuries. It became the accepted narrative.
I have a quote here from Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great American philosopher, writing in 1856. And he was not a fan. He was firmly in the anti-Vespucci camp.
Oh, the Emerson quote is absolutely scathing. It's the peak of that sentiment.
He wrote, "Strange that broad America must wear the name of a thief. Amerigo Vespucci, the pickle dealer at Seville, whose highest naval rank was boatswain's mate in an expedition that never sailed, managed in this lying world to supplant Columbus and baptize half the earth with his own dishonest name."
Pickle dealer. It's such a dismissive, powerful insult. That sticks. Emerson was channeling the righteous anger of centuries of historians who felt Columbus got ripped off.
But is that fair? Based on our deep dive today, what's the modern take?
Modern historians don't think so. The consensus now is that Vespucci himself likely didn't write the sensational Soderini letter that claimed he was first. That was almost certainly a publisher trying to make a buck by combining and embellising real letters. In a way, Vespucci was framed for success he never claimed.
When you look at the private letters and his incredibly important work as pilot mayor, you see a totally different person. You see a man who was a competent navigator and, more importantly, a brilliant synthesizer of information.
He was the guy who could see the forest, not just the trees. Columbus saw islands and coasts and tried to force them into his mental map of Asia. Vespucci saw the same things and was willing to step back and say, hold on, this doesn't fit. This is something new.
It's a kind of intellectual flexibility or intellectual courage.
Exactly. Columbus had the drive and the raw courage to cross the ocean first. No one can ever take that away from him. But Vespucci had the intellectual tools and the open-mindedness to understand what had actually been found. He realized it was a Mundus Novus, and in the history of science and geography, understanding a discovery is just as important as making it.
So maybe he deserves the name on the map after all. Or at least we shouldn't feel too bad about it.
I think we can make peace with it. America is named after a man who was curious, educated, adaptable, and willing to change his mind when the data contradicted the established theories. That's not a bad legacy for a continent when you think about it.
It certainly beats being known forever as the pickle guy.
It certainly does.
So here's a final thought for you to mull over. We often say history is written by the victors, but in this case, history was written by the writers. Columbus did the heavy lifting. He braved the unknown, he took the risk. But Vespucci, or the people writing under his name, told the better story. They captured the imagination of Europe with tales of a new world, cannibals, and strange constellations, while Columbus was still arguing about Asian trade routes.
It raises a really profound question, doesn't it? Does history belong to those who make the history or to those who describe it most effectively? The deed versus the word. In the case of Amerigo Vespucci and the naming of America, the word won.
Something to think about the next time you open Google Maps. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.